You believe that words are power. You believe that volume, eloquence, and the ability to dominate a conversation are the markers of intelligence and social worth. You have been taught since childhood that to be quiet is to be weak, and to be silent is to concede defeat. This belief is not merely wrong. It is the most sophisticated form of self-sabotage, and it is the precise reason why the vast majority of people surrender their peace, their power, and their focus every single day. The person who speaks constantly reveals one devastating truth. They are terrified of silence, and thus terrified of their own mind. Words, when undisciplined, are the weapons you use against yourself. They are the currency of gossip, the fuel of anxiety, and the primary vehicle through which you surrender your sovereignty to the trivialities of the external world. For the next 10 hours, we will fundamentally rewire your relationship with language. We will not teach you how to talk more effectively. We will teach you how to master the conversation by saying less. We will forge a mind that speaks only from necessity, only from truth, and only from a profound, unshakable internal calm. This is the Stoic logic of the tongue. We will draw from Socrates, who mastered the art of speech by focusing on the question, from Epictetus, who commanded us to speak only when forced, and from Seneca, who saw in idle chatter the greatest theft of precious time. By the end of this journey, you will recognize that true rhetorical power is not found in the expression of your opinion, but in the rigorous, disciplined containment of it. This is the path of quiet authority, the path of the few who choose wisdom over noise. Welcome to the Stoic logic. Your transformation begins with the commitment to listen to the very principles that demand silence. The first fundamental rule for mastering speech is this. Rule 1. The principle of necessary. Silence assume all external speech is a surrender of sovereignty. This rule is the foundation of all subsequent discipline. The instant you choose to speak unnecessarily to fill a gap, to express an opinion no one asked for, to interject simply because you have an idea, you have performed a subtle but profound surrender. You have taken your precious, finite mental energy and cast it into the external void, making it subject to the judgment, interpretation, and fleeting notice of others. Your strength lies entirely within your inner citadel, the fortress of your mind. Speech is the open gate through which the enemy is most likely to invade. Therefore, the principle demands that your default state must be silence. Speech is not a default function. It is a deliberate, high-cost exception. The logic demands that you view every potential spoken word as having an associated financial cost. Is the word you are about to utter worth the inevitable cost of external judgment, misinterpretation, and the mental energy required to defend it? For the strong, the answer must almost always be no. The moment you state an opinion, you are instantly drawn into the social, reactive, chaotic cycle of defense and justification. The silent person remains unassailable. Their peace is their own. The greatest power in any room is wielded not by the person who speaks first or loudest, but by the one whose voice is so rare that when they finally choose to deploy it, their words carry the undeniable weight of intention and necessity. The philosophical cost of unnecessary speech is astronomical. It represents a loss of logos, that divine, ordered logic, because most idle chatter is merely noisy, disciplined, fleeting, emotional reaction. Seneca warned that the endless, habitual exchange of words about trivial matters is one of the most significant ways we allow others to steal our time. We let them consume our minutes, our focus, and our intellectual dignity through the porous boundary of our tongue. The strong mind recognizes that verbal output is a drain on cognitive resources. The energy wasted forming and defending trivial opinions is the very energy that should be reserved for rigorous thought, deep focus, and the demanding work of silence is not emptiness. Silence is the full, concentrated presence of the mind, gathering its forces. Speech, when unnecessary, is dissipation. To practice this rule, you must apply a demanding, three-part philosophical filter before any word is allowed to cross your lips. This is the ultimate test of containment. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? The strong person recognizes that most human conversation fails. On the second point, is it necessary? An opinion might be true, but if it is not necessary to the immediate purpose or virtuous well-being of the interaction, speaking it is a weakness. You must train your mind to value the containment of truth over the gratification of expression. The vast, unsaid majority of your thoughts must remain within the confines of your own mind. Refining your character without the corruption of external social feedback. The weak person seeks external validation through talking. The strong person finds internal validation through silence and correct action. This is the profound, disciplined power of saying nothing. We proceed now to the second, devastating rule that separates the disciplined master of language from the chaotic slave of expression. The first rule demanded silence as your default state. This rule explains why that silence is the only path to genuine, unassailable power. Rule 2. The logic of the uncontrollable response. Recognize. The listener's interpretation is not your property. This rule directly confronts the greatest, most pervasive weakness that forces the tongue into constant motion, the pathetic, lifelong addiction to external validation. The average person does not speak primarily to convey necessary information or to serve a virtuous purpose. They speak to manage the perception of the audience. They talk to be liked, to be approved of, to appear intelligent, to deflect criticism, or to fill the terrifying vacuum of social silence with the comforting assurance that they are, indeed, being seen. This relentless drive to manage external perception is what makes your language, and thus your inner life, fundamentally fragile. The iron logic demands that you apply the dichotomy of control, the core principle of Stoicism, ruthlessly to your speech. The dichotomy teaches that there are only two categories of existence: things within your control and things outside your control. When it comes to communication, the division is absolute and terrifyingly simple. Your words are within your control. The listener's ear, mind, and subsequent opinion are entirely outside of it. The constant talker is a psychological fool because they are engaged in the most futile of all philosophical enterprises, attempting to use a controllable variable, their words, to dictate an uncontrollable outcome, the listener's subjective judgment. You can choose the most eloquent, most truthful, most virtuous phrase, but you cannot choose how it will be received. It can be misinterpreted, ignored, twisted by envy, or forgotten entirely, and none of this is subject to your will. Therefore, every single word uttered with the intent to seek praise or manage social outcome is an act of profound self-betrayal and external dependence. You have voluntarily rendered your own peace fragile, placing it into the chaotic, unreliable hands of others. Epictetus, observing the weakness of the average man, was absolutely clear on this. He stated that the philosopher must reject the pursuit of applause. If you want to live a life free of sorrow, consider what things are within your power and what are outside it. When you speak for effect, when you chase the temporary, chemical rush of affirmation, You have made the listener your master. They hold the power to grant or deny your emotional stability. The moment their opinion shifts, the moment they criticize, your internal world collapses because you built it on their unreliable approval. The strong person reverses this logic. They speak only because the truth demands expression, not because the audience demands validation. This rule creates the necessity of the internal judge. You must fire the external jury, the crowd, the colleague, the friend, and establish your own private, severe, uncorruptible judge within your inner citadel. This internal judge must evaluate your speech based on one criterion only: virtue. Did I speak because the truth required it? Did I speak because it was necessary for justice or duty? Did I speak to serve my logos? If the answer is no, if you spoke only for the gratification of being acknowledged, then your speech was a philosophical failure, regardless of how many people praised you. The disciplined life is an endless effort to make the voice of the internal judge louder than the noise of the external crowd. Furthermore, this rule is the ultimate defense against the poison of criticism. The weak person, when criticized or misunderstood, rushes to defend, to explain, to justify, using more and more words, which only fuels the initial fire. They attempt to use their own controllable input, more talk, to change an already uncontrollable output, the critic's fixed opinion. The strong person, the master of conversation, absorbs the criticism silently. They filter it through the internal judge. If the criticism is true, they accept it and correct their action. If it is false, they dismiss it, recognizing that the other person's error in judgment is a matter entirely outside their domain. The silent acceptance of misunderstanding is the highest form of power, for it shows that your peace is entirely unassailable by the mere opinion of others. Therefore, the practice of Rule 2 demands a ruthless, continuous audit of your intent. Before you open your mouth, pause and ask yourself, am I about to speak to convey something true or to obtain something from the listener? If the intent is extraction, validation, attention, praise, then the logic demands silence. Let your actions speak for your character. Let your silence speak for your unshakable peace. Asterisk, we turn now to the third rule, which is the very essence of philosophical mastery over language, the relentless pursuit of brevity, precision, and the elimination of the superfluous. Rule 3. The virtue of brevity. Recognize that eloquence is found in communicating only the essential. This rule is a direct confrontation with the human tendency toward verbosity, which is a weakness born of insecurity. The average person, when speaking, uses a vast excess of words, not to enhance clarity, but to create a protective, intellectual fog around a simple, often trivial, idea. They mistake volume for substance and length for depth. This philosophical flaw is profound. They talk because they are afraid that if they say only the essential, the smallness of their idea will be exposed. Thus, they bury the core truth beneath layers of unnecessary explanation, caveats, and rhetorical flourish. This endless, excessive talk is not mastery. It is simply self-generated noise, a surrender to the fear of silence. The iron logic demands that you view all unnecessary words as cognitive pollution. Seneca, observing the chaotic speech patterns of his contemporaries, constantly admonished against multiloquium, much speaking. He understood that true eloquence is not measured by the length of a speech, but by its density of meaning. The stronger the thought, the fewer words it requires. The philosopher trains his mind to communicate the core of an idea with the cold, surgical precision of a highly trained artisan, using only the bare minimum of language required to transfer the necessary truth from his mind to the listener's understanding. This rule demands that you adopt the Spartan principle of speech. The Spartans were famous for their laconic utterances, brief, pointed statements that conveyed absolute resolution and meaning without decoration. When you speak, you must apply a rigorous mental filter. If I remove this clause, this adjective, this personal anecdote, does the core meaning of my statement survive? If the answer is yes, then the removed words were simply weakness, simply noise. The constant presence of locus rational, disciplined thought should be evident in the crystalline structure of your sentences. If your speech is sprawling, disorganized, and reliant on emotional momentum, it betrays a mind that is equally sprawling and disorganized. The philosophical cost of verbosity is devastating. Firstly, it steals time from the listener. When you use 10 words where 3 would suffice, you are consuming the most precious resource of another human being for the sake of your own self-gratification. Secondly, it steals credibility from your message. The more time a person spends talking, the less weight their words inherently carry. The person whose voice is rare and whose statements are concise and purposeful commands immediate, undivided attention. The loud voice is often ignored. The quiet, precise voice is always heard. To practice the virtue of brevity, you must cultivate the discipline of the pause before responding to any question or interjecting any thought. You must force a moment of intentional, rigorous silence. This pause is not an empty space. It is the critical juncture where you mentally dismantle your intended sentence, stripping away all unnecessary rhetoric and editing your thought for maximum density. The pause ensures that when you finally speak, you speak only from necessity, not from reaction. The pause turns speech from a reflex into a deliberate, high-cost investment. Furthermore, you must recognize the relationship between your vocabulary and your philosophical depth. The weak person uses many words, but those words are shallow, redundant, and imprecise. The strong person uses fewer words, but those words are carefully chosen, dense with meaning, and precisely aligned with the truth they intend to convey. This internal rigor transforms your very use of language from a social performance into a powerful act of intellectual economy. The true master of conversation is not the one who can fill an hour, but the one who can convey truth in 60 seconds. Their silence is gold. Their word is the necessary coin. We advance now to the fourth rule, one that acts as a profound litmus test for the philosophical quality of your character. This rule demands the complete, uncompromising eradication of judgment and triviality from your speech, separating the disciplined mind from the common, chaotic mob. Rule 4. The causal filtering. Eliminate all speech about others. Recognizing gossip as the ultimate philosophical weakness. The majority of verbal output in the social world is dedicated not to the pursuit of truth or virtue, but to the discussion, critique, and judgment of absent third parties. This is known universally as gossip, but philosophically, it is a profound weakness for 2 devastating reasons. Firstly, it is a catastrophic waste of your time and focus, diverting your finite mental energy from the only domain that matters, your own conduct, to a domain you cannot control, the lives of others. Secondly, and more fundamentally, engaging in gossip is an instantaneous, public confession of your own psychological insecurity and moral weakness. The iron logic demands that you apply the causal filter to every conversation. When a topic shifts to the flaws, failures, or personal affairs of a third party, you must instantly, internally, recognize that information as irrelevant noise. Epictetus commanded, "Let your talk mostly concern what should be done, not what should be avoided." When you speak ill of others, you gain nothing and lose everything. You lose the respect of those who listen, you lose credibility, and most importantly, you lose valuable time that could have been dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom. The person who readily criticizes others in your presence will just as readily criticize you in their absence. You must internalize the Stoic truth that the faults of others are their own property. Their actions are the inevitable result of their own unexamined assumptions, ignorance, and lack of logos. When you spend time analyzing or condemning their actions, you are merely allowing their flaws to pollute your own mind. The strong mind recognizes that analyzing the ethical quality of another person's life is a distraction from the necessary, difficult task of auditing your own. Your mission is self-sculpting, not the architectural review of your neighbors. Therefore, the practice of the causal filter is simple but brutal. When the conversation turns to judgment or trivial critique of an absent person, you must either become silent or immediately redirect the focus back to a topic of virtue, action, or essential truth. You must train yourself to withdraw verbal consent from discussions of low philosophical value. If a colleague attempts to engage you in gossip, your response must be an internal, immediate recoil, recognizing that this is a direct attempt to steal your time and contaminate your character. Your disciplined silence in the face of triviality acts as a powerful, necessary social constraint, implicitly elevating the quality of the conversation for all involved. Furthermore, this rule applies equally to the discussion of your own life's trivialities. The weak person uses constant conversation about their own minor problems, anxieties, and mundane details as a mechanism for seeking attention and pity. The strong person understands that their struggles are internal laboratory experiments, meant to be processed and solved within the confines of the inner citadel. Sharing your trivial problems is not therapy. It is a confession of emotional dependency. The master of conversation recognizes that words are too valuable to be wasted on the defense or explanation of the not. Your speech must be reserved for the delivery of solutions, wisdom, and necessary information. The strength of your character is revealed in the quiet, dignified containment of your own daily life. Asterisk. We have established the necessity of silence, the rejection of the listener's control, and the virtue of brevity. We turn now to the fifth rule, which acts as the ultimate, definitive test of your self-mastery, the conscious, absolute eradication of all speech designed to impress, to boast, or to secure external admiration. Rule 5, the test of the internal. Socrates eliminates all speech seeking external validation or admiration. The compulsion to speak often stems from a deep, crippling psychological need to demonstrate competence, achievement, or intellectual superiority to others. This need is the primary currency of the ego. When you speak to impress, when you deliberately inject facts about your success, your wisdom, or your material possessions into a conversation where they are not strictly necessary, you are performing a complex, public confession of your own profound internal insecurity. You are screaming to the room, "I do not believe my own worth, so I require you to validate it for me." The iron logic demands that you view all external praise and validation as a highly corrosive psychological poison. The moment you tailor your speech to elicit praise, to secure the applause, the laughter, or the admiration of the crowd. You have voluntarily handed over the key to your inner citadel. Epictetus observed that the person whose inner peace is dependent on the applause of others has made those very people his master. When they choose to praise you, you feel a temporary, fleeting high. When they choose to criticize you, you crash into despair. Your emotional stability becomes a slave to their capricious opinions. The strong mind rejects this dependency entirely. Your internal progress, your pursuit of virtue, your discipline, your competence must be recorded exclusively on your internal scorecard. This score is visible only to you and your highest reason logos. It is irrelevant what the external world scores your life or your words. If you have acted virtuously, if your speech was necessary and true, the internal judge rewards you with peace, and no external criticism can shake it. Conversely, if you spoke poorly or boasted, no amount of external praise can cover the internal shame of having acted weakly. Therefore, the practice of Rule 5 is brutally simple. Never speak about yourself, your achievements, your possessions, or your wisdom unless explicitly asked, and even then, respond with ruthless brevity. This rule requires the cultivation of philosophical indifference to praise and criticism. The weak person seeks praise and avoids criticism. The strong person views both as fundamentally irrelevant noise. Praise offers no lasting nourishment to the soul, and criticism offers no lasting damage to one's character unless it is true, in which case it is useful. Seneca was particularly harsh on boastfulness, recognizing it as the ultimate form of self-deception and intellectual clutter. The person who constantly talks about their own competence is often the most incompetent when tested by reality. To reinforce this rule, you must apply the boasting filter when the impulse to speak arises. Ask yourself, am I speaking now to elevate my status in the eyes of the listener? If the answer is yes, then the word must be contained. Instead, train your mind to view conversation as an opportunity for giving value, asking insightful questions, offering necessary information, or affirming the virtue of others, rather than an opportunity for taking praise. Your strength is not proven by the loudness of your own claims, but by the quiet, observable quality of your actions. The most commanding presence in any room is the person whose character is so obviously strong that they do not need to spend a single word advertising it. We move now to the 6th rule, which, ironically, is the one that involves no speaking at all. Yet it is the rule that unlocks the greatest power in any conversation. This is the ultimate test of temperance applied to your social interactions. Rule 6. The practice of deep listening. Recognize that silence is not passive, but the highest form of active power. The weak person approaches conversation not as an exchange of information or a pursuit of shared truth, but as a competitive platform, a queue where they wait for their turn to speak. Their listening is merely a brief pause, a tactical silence spent formulating their next utterance, rehearsing their rebuttal, or waiting for the other person to make a grammatical error they can exploit. This is not listening. This is an aggressive, verbal impatience, revealing a mind so consumed by its own ego that it cannot genuinely absorb new information. The iron logic demands that you view silence during dialogue not as a weakness or a passive state, but as the highest form of active, sovereign power. The true master of conversation listens with intent, with full presence, and without the internal distraction of formulating a response. This is deep listening. It is a philosophical practice that requires absolute temperance, the discipline to contain your own impulse to interrupt or to mentally check out. By committing to deep listening, you achieve 4 critical advantages. Firstly, you gain superior information. The primary goal of conversation should be to acquire knowledge and understand the reality of the other person, not to broadcast your own pre-existing opinions. The person who speaks less learns more, and information is the ultimate currency of intellectual strength. Secondly, you project unshakable authority. When you listen deeply, you project a calm, unhurried, and genuinely interested presence. This presence commands respect because it signifies a mind that is fully in control of its own time and attention. The person who rushes to speak reveals a lack of gravity. The person who listens profoundly signals a mind that is weighing every syllable and is not easily impressed or easily swayed. Thirdly, you achieve philosophical empathy. This is the Stoic recognition of our shared humanity. By truly hearing the other person's perspective, without preparing your defense, you gain insight into the causality of their actions and their errors. This allows you to judge their conduct with greater fairness and, crucially, prevents you from becoming emotionally entangled or angered by their inevitable mistakes. Fourthly, you facilitate true influence. The only way to guide another person's understanding, if necessary, is by first entering their intellectual and emotional framework. By listening, you learn their premises, their fears, and their true motivations. You cannot influence a mind you have not first understood. Your silence creates the space for them to reveal their vulnerabilities and their true needs, which gives you the strategic advantage to practice Rule 6. You must apply the listening commandment. When the other person is speaking, your only job is to understand, not to judge, not to formulate a response, simply to understand. If your mind wanders to what you will say next, you must instantly command it back to the present moment, back to the speaker's words. This practice is the true training ground for the inner citadel, testing your ability to maintain focus and temperance under the constant friction of social interaction. The quality of your silence is a direct reflection of the quality of your character. We have journeyed through the necessity of silence, the rejection of external vanity, the virtue of brevity, and the power of listening. We arrive now at the final, 7th rule, which provides the strategic tool for when speech becomes absolutely necessary. This rule flips the entire competitive structure of conversation on its head, turning your words from a source of vulnerability into a source of profound, unassailable strength. Rule 7, the Socratic method of questioning. Master conversation by speaking primarily to learn, not to inform. The weak person speaks to broadcast. The strong person speaks to acquire. The average person's engagement in dialogue is structured as a series of defensive statements, assertions, and declarations of their own certainty. This display is brittle and invites challenge. If you state an opinion, you offer a target. If you assert a fact, you invite contradiction. The Socratic method, the highest philosophical form of conversation, recognized that true power in dialogue is not found in possessing the answer, but in possessing the critical question. By training your mind to prioritize the insightful question over the assertive statement, you achieve a triple strategic advantage. Firstly, you instantly elevate the quality of the conversation and redirect it away from personal drama or trivial noise. Rule 4. An excellent question compels the speaker to abandon superficiality and engage with genuine depth. Secondly, you project intellectual authority without committing verbal resources. The person who asks the best questions is immediately perceived as the most thoughtful, intelligent, and engaged person in the room, yet they risk nothing. You demonstrate knowledge not by showing what you know, but by showing what you know how to pursue. Thirdly, and most crucially, you force the other person to reveal their premises and their vulnerabilities. The question is a subtle, unassailable probe that maps the landscape of the other person's mind, revealing their biases, their logical gaps, and the foundation of their beliefs. You gain superior information while offering none of your own in return. This rule demands the cultivation of philosophical curiosity over ego gratification. You must train your mind to view the conversation not as a platform for self-display, Rule 5, but as a rare opportunity for intellectual excavation. When the compulsion to state your own opinion arises, you must apply the question filter. Instead of asserting my belief, what is the single, most precise question I can ask to understand the foundation of their belief? This shift changes your entire posture from a defensive stance to an investigative one. The practice of Socratic questioning is the ultimate safeguard against the weakness of verbosity, Rule 3. The question forces brevity, demanding that your speech be precise and economical. A sprawling, ill-defined question yields no meaningful result. A perfect question, however, is a masterpiece of brevity, containing vast philosophical implications within its concise structure. Furthermore, the question reinforces deep listening, Rule 6, because you cannot ask the next relevant, insightful question unless you have fully, actively absorbed the answer to the previous one. The two practices are inseparable. The final strength of the question is its ethical utility. By focusing on guiding the other person to examine their own unexamined assumptions, you are serving the highest virtuous purpose, helping them achieve greater clarity and self-awareness. You are engaging in a philosophical act of service, subtly leading them towards truth, without ever falling into the weakness of confrontation or argument. The true master of speech wields the question, the quietest, shortest, and most focused form of language, is the most formidable tool of influence and intellectual sovereignty. Asterisk. We have journeyed through the 7 strategic rules that dismantled the weakness of the undisciplined tongue. We now enter a critical phase, the philosophical synthesis of these rules into a single, cohesive systema, practice for the mind, that must become as reflexive as breathing. This synthesis is the culmination of the Stoic logic of speech. It demands that you recognize the profound interconnectedness of all 7 rules. The principle of necessary silence, Rule 1, cannot be maintained without the logic of the uncontrollable response, Rule 2. You cannot practice the virtue of brevity, Rule 3, unless you first master deep listening, Rule 6. And you cannot wield the Socratic question, Rule 7, until you have fully abandoned the need for external validation, Rule 5. These rules are not separate actions. They are facets of a single, unified, sovereign character. The failure to maintain discipline in one area, for instance, allowing gossip rule for immediately compromises your discipline in all areas, because it poisons your mental landscape with triviality, making true silence impossible. The system is only as strong as your weakest link. This synthesis brings us to the ascesis of the tongue, the rigorous, daily training required to transform theoretical understanding into embodied strength. Ascesis is the philosophical term for deliberate, challenging practice. Your new ascesis is the relentless monitoring of your own speech. For the disciplined mind, the conversation is not a casual social event. It is a laboratory, a crucible where your principles are tested in real time. Your daily practice must begin with the morning vigilance command. Before you leave your inner citadel, command your mind. Today I will speak only to serve virtue, and I will find peace in saying nothing. This is the establishment of your intention, similar to the morning intention of the Stoics, setting the highest bar for your verbal output. Throughout the day, you must apply the momentary speech audit. Immediately after any interaction, pause. Do not rush to the next task. Review your verbal performance using the 7 rules. Did I speak unnecessarily? Rule 1. Did I chase praise? Rule 5. Did I let the conversation drift into the chaos of gossip? Rule 4. Every instance of failure is not an excuse for self-condemnation, but a crucial data point, a necessary correction in the navigation system of your character. The person who monitors their own speech performance ruthlessly is the person who is guaranteed continuous self-improvement. Furthermore, you must introduce deliberate, scheduled periods of verbal fasting. Choose 1 hour, 1 morning, or even 1 entire day per week, where you commit to speaking only when directly addressed or when absolutely required by duty. This voluntary, self-imposed silence is the most powerful training tool available. It forces your mind to confront its own dependence on external noise and reveals the profound hidden restlessness that often drives idle speech. When you remove the option of speaking, your mind is forced to engage in the deeper, more demanding work of observing, listening, and thinking with clarity. The ultimate goal of the ascesis of the tongue is to eliminate the impulse to speak from weakness. You are training your mind to equate silence with strength and noise with vulnerability. The result of this practice is a quiet, profound transformation of your social presence. You will find that when you speak less, your words are not only clearer and more meaningful, Rule 3, but others instinctively project greater depth, wisdom, and authority onto your silence. You gain respect not through performance, but through containment. You become the quiet center of gravity in any room, a person whose very presence commands the attention that others try desperately to extract through constant noise. This is the synthesis of the 7 rules. They are unified under the supreme philosophical imperative of self-control, ensuring that your voice is always a tool of purpose, never a confession of weakness. We proceed now to a critical, demanding reflection on the consequence of failure. We have established the 7 rules for mastery, but the philosophical urgency for adhering to them is found in understanding the astronomical cost of the weak, undisciplined word. This is the true moral accounting that the average person refuses to perform. The weak word, the unnecessary sentence, the unexamined opinion, these are not merely social faux pas. They are systematic erosions of your character and your sovereign power. The first and most immediate cost of indisciplined speech is the decay of credibility. The person who speaks constantly and unnecessarily devalues their own currency. The human mind is wired to value scarcity. When your voice is deployed frequently, randomly, and without necessity, the listener's brain automatically assigns low weight to your output. Rule 3. Conversely, the person who reserves their words, who adheres to necessary silence, finds that when they finally choose to speak, their single sentence carries 10 times the weight and gravitational authority of a constant talker's endless monologue. You forfeit your capacity for influence every time you speak a word that is not essential. You must view your credibility as a finite psychological asset that is drained with every weak utterance. The second cost is the loss of the inner fortress. The undisciplined tongue is the greatest vulnerability of the inner citadel. By constantly expressing your fleeting emotions, your reactive judgments, or your temporary anxieties, you are externalizing your internal chaos. This externalization gives the chaos permanence and power. The Stoic trains his mind to contain the momentary impulse, knowing that the contained emotion often dissolves harmlessly within the mind, without requiring external validation or expression. The weak person, by instantly venting their anger, their fear, or their frustration through speech, solidifies that negative emotion, giving it life and permanence in the external world. You sacrifice your peace the moment you allow an undisciplined emotion to be verbalized. Rule 1. The third cost is the contamination of purpose. The average person spends the vast majority of their verbal output on the non-essential gossip, entertainment, reactive defense. Rule 4. This verbal focus dictates your mental focus. If your speech is constantly concerned with the trivial, your mind soon follows. The tongue acts as a GPS system for your attention. By speaking of low-value matters, you actively reprogram your mind to care about low-value matters. The continuous verbal audit of your speech is, therefore, a necessary defense mechanism for maintaining the integrity of your purpose. Your words must be a direct reflection of your highest goals, or they are an active obstruction to them. The fourth and most crushing cost is the theft of time and focus from others. When you engage in endless, verbose conversation, you are not merely wasting your own time. You are aggressively stealing the most finite, non-renewable asset of every person listening to you. Rule 3. You are imposing your own lack of self-control upon their schedule. The strong person operates under the ethic of respect for the time of others. By speaking only with utmost brevity and necessity, you demonstrate the highest form of respect, valuing their time equally with your own. The weak person is a conversational parasite, consuming the attention of others without providing commensurate intellectual or virtuous return. Finally, the cumulative cost of the weak word is the erosion of character. The consistent failure to apply the rules, the continuous seeking of external praise. Rule 5. The failure to listen deeply. Rule 6. The indulgence in criticism. Rule 4. Is not merely a series of small social failures. It is the slow, systematic destruction of your identity. Over time, the person who fails to master their tongue embodies the very weakness their speech represents. They become defined by their reactivity, their vanity, and their intellectual superficiality. The silent, disciplined tongue is not merely an achievement of rhetoric. It is the necessary proof of a sovereign, strong, and virtuous soul. Your final strength, your final peace, rests entirely on the quality of the words you choose not to speak. Asterisk. We have reached the culmination of this immense philosophical undertaking. We have systematically faced the 7 strategic rules that dismantle the weakness of the undisciplined tongue. This final synthesis demands that you see these rules not as a checklist, but as a single, unified commitment to your inner sovereignty. You are no longer the person who entered this journey. That former self, the one who spoke to seek approval, the one who gossiped to feel important, the one who feared the social vacuum of silence. That person is gone, replaced by a consciousness aware of the logic of the unsaid. This final section is about the integration and the cost of this new discipline. The 7 rules. Silence. 1. Rejection of control. 2. Brevity. 3. The causal filter. 4. Internal scorecard. 5. Deep listening. 6. And Socratic questioning. 7. Must now fuse into a second nature. You cannot practice deep listening without simultaneously rejecting the desire for external validation. You cannot wield the Socratic question without first mastering brevity. The system is comprehensive, and the commitment must be absolute. The failure to maintain discipline in one area, to indulge in one piece of gossip, to seek one moment of praises, not a minor slip. It is a philosophical breach that compromises the integrity of your entire inner citadel. The integrity of your character is indivisible. The final cost of the weak word is the erosion of your own reality. When you constantly speak in exaggeration, in defense, in self-pity, or in triviality, your own mind, your logos, begins to believe the noise over the truth. You become defined by your own superficial output. The disciplined tongue, therefore, is not merely an achievement of rhetoric. It is the necessary proof of a sovereign, strong, and virtuous soul. Your final strength, your final peace, rests entirely on the quality and the scarcity of the words you choose not to speak. Now you have the blueprint. You have completed the intellectual journey. You possess the knowledge of the rules, the logic of their necessity, and the full awareness of the devastating costs of failure. The only thing separating you from the true mastery of conversation is action the conscious. Relentless execution of this logic in every social interaction. Every hour of your life, your final commitment must be to the ascesis of the tongue. The severe daily practice of silent vigilance. You must view every conversation as a test, every silence as an opportunity, and every unsaid, unnecessary word as a victory. You must train your mind to equate silence with strength and noise with vulnerability. The result of this practice is a profound, unshakable transformation of your social presence. You become the quiet center of gravity in any room. A person whose very containment commands the attention that others try desperately to extract through constant, anxious noise. The choice is now simple, but it is monumental. You can allow this philosophical structure, this blueprint for quiet power, to remain a passive memory, letting the gravitational pull of old habits and the pressure of the noisy crowd drag you back into the weakness of constant expression. Or you can embrace the immediate, short-term pain of discipline, securing the profound, long-term authority that only mastery of the unsaid word can provide. The iron logic demands this final choice. You are no longer permitted the luxury of passive weakness. The time for learning the rules is over. The time for negotiation is past. The time for action is now. Go and prove the strength of your silence.